Okay, well, I will call to order this evening's Ways and Means Committee meeting. If we could get a roll call, please.
Chairwoman Sims.
Here.
Alderman Leahy.
Here.
Alderwoman O'Neill. Here. Alderwoman Tice. Here. All present.
And then if I could get a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
That can be approved by acclamation. Moving on, I don't have any announcements, appointments, proclamations, or recognitions. Item number 4 on the agenda is citizen comments. If any member of the citizenry would like to come forward, you'll be given 3 minutes. State your name, address. Seeing none, moving right along. Item number 5, committee chair and alderman reports. I have no report. Alderman Leahy.
No report.
Alderwoman O'Neill.
No report.
Alderwoman Tice.
No report.
Okay. Then we'll get to the meat of the meeting. Item number, let's see what we said. Item number 6 is the proposed 2020 budget presentation. This is the first of multiple committee meetings that have been scheduled to review the proposed 2020 budget. And for those watching from home or aldermen not on the committee, I certainly would invite any questions that that you would have specifically, or things that after reviewing this meeting that you think should be addressed. I certainly want to make sure that we do a comprehensive analysis of the proposed budget, so in advance of having it go before the big board. As far as where we would begin on this process, I think that it probably would be good to begin with sort of a general, the dreaded 30,000 foot picture, summary. If we started with, our projected revenues, where we could, if you could, Karen, if you could take us through that, and the, where we'll be at the end after we, do the net of expenditures, and then I'm just mapping out where I'm seeing this going, and we'll see how far we get tonight, and then I think from there we'll go through specific, some general topics that might overlap different departments, and then specific departments, with general questions, and then to the extent, of course, the committee has specific questions, this is the time to kick that off. So I guess with that, Karen, if you could lead us off.
So the highest level, we're going to start with the highest level, is the page 15 in the budget. That's all the funds. It gives you the history of what we've done. It gives you, in the past, what we've collected in revenues for all the funds. It gives you what was budgeted for 19. It gives you what's been estimated for 19 to finish out the year. And then the proposed for 20, and then what is projected for 20 and 21. 20 and 21 is very high level because it's really hard to project that far out in the future, but we do it because we are looking specifically in the general fund for that very last line, that operating reserves, and it's been discussed many times about how it was changed from 15, right, Bola? 15% to 50, I think a couple years ago. 50% is very aggressive to try and get reserves that high, but if you look, we tried very hard to get from the actual in 2018 was 42.61. The budgeted is 43 for 19 is 43.63. Proposed is 45.03, and then it goes up from there. Bola may mention this later about Standard & Poor's grilled Bola and I on that percentage, what they ended up saying, because we're not at 50%, but that's a goal. It doesn't say that we're required. That's a goal. It says, our ordinance says, if we fall to 10% or less, it is cause for concern, and then at that point, city administration has to come up with a plan on how we're going to reach that 50% goal, or attempt to go through it. That is something that we drilled into the department heads when they were preparing their expenditures. And then we conservatively budgeted the revenues, so that's how we came up with those percentages. Quickly on the general fund, even though, if you look to the right as far as revenues, it's the second line in general fund under revenues, it shows that there's a minus 37% decrease. That is from budgeted 20 to 19, the two budgeted years. But if you look at what we're estimating in 19, at 2.7, we're still anticipating an increase in 2020 in the revenues, general fund revenues. What was given to you all, I don't know, 3 months ago, I don't remember how many months ago, which was line item. I think I started out that meeting, I don't believe Bola was on vacation, but I was positive because it was in my notes to do so, to tell you that those were estimates at that time and were subject to change, and they have changed. Not a lot, but they've changed some based on, you know, what we've seen coming in the last 2 to 3 months. So that's high level. We have presented you with the balanced budget in the general fund, which is one that is most concerning to Standard & Poor's. Capital, I believe, and I'm sure the department heads will correct me if I'm wrong, for the most part, what they've asked for, we budgeted for. And then the third thing I'll bring you to is the Economic Development Fund, which will strictly be to account for the economic development sales tax, as well as where we will be paying debt service. That is all budgeted in there. The expenditures that you see for estimated 19 was what was given to us from Stiefel? Yes. Or Mark Grimm? Stiefel. However, that was back when we were preparing that. Obviously, you got something last night. I have not changed those numbers, but they would go down because you saw where things went down. Parks and Stormwater, a very good overview was given to you by Bola in the budget message, because not only did she give you the overview, she also gave you what just specifically Parks and Recs would be doing, and I believe Parks and Recs fund balance, they would be increasing to the fund balance, meaning they anticipate bringing in more revenues than what they are budgeting. To touch on storm sewer, we talked a lot about this, Dan and Bola and I, and you all, well, let me just rephrase that. Everybody in the city's talked about this multiple times at multiple meetings. And if you look, the proposed revenues is still $148,000. Bola did reach out to Mark, is it Mark? DeVore, St. Louis tax collector. He came back with an estimate based on what $148,000 is what they would bill. $50 per the number of people, household. He doesn't anticipate we're going to get that. He anticipates $111,000. I don't think we should budget $111,000. That's what he was going through. And again, we can look at this again anytime we want next year, after 3 months, after 6 months. And if it's not coming in at $148,000, and we'll get a really good idea towards the end of the year, because we haven't collected all that for 2019 yet, we would change it. As far as expenditures, what we budgeted for was, I think, something like 27 households at the maximum of $3,500. Two things to keep in mind, not every, and I think Dan can attest to this, not every repair are we paying $3,500. That's a maximum, so we got to start somewhere. We use that, and then we are going to attempt to start paying $20,000 a year back to the general fund. One other thing we budgeted for in 19 to move 90, I think 90,000 from the general fund to sewer. We don't anticipate moving it, and that's reflected in the estimated numbers in for the sewer fund. What really stands out, if you see a number stand out, is in 19, that minus 15.75%. But that's a capital reserve, but we're not doing sewer fund. We have farmed that out. So there's very little capital we would need in that fund. So I think Dan does anticipate there's one or two little pieces of equipment that is used in this number to come up with the negative. So that's it, and over top of the 20,000 feet view. And I just checking my notes. From there, the book gets more and more specific, especially in the general fund, gets down to the each department's what they've asked for, and then there's the capital fund, and then there's the economic development fund. And then the back of the book is informational things that we're given.
How strongly can you just talk about our projected revenues generally? You know, how are they trending? How good does the city feel about our projection? Because all of our expenditures, you know, are more or less a function of what we think we're going to make. I know in particular, you know, we're going to be having some closures, you know, in Brentwood. You know, what if any impact do you see with regard to our revenues?
Do you want to take it? So yeah, we've talked about some of the closures, but then again, there's been things open, such as, well, we already know Houlihan's is gonna close, or has closed. What was that other one? Dress Barn, right? Sonic is gonna close. And then we've added Aspen Dental. Has that opened? What else? Burlington opened. They don't call it that anymore. You know, so there's a kind of trade-offs, and in fact, we were talking about this with Jim Leahy about the COPs, and he kind of just threw out there, yeah, I would see either a trade-off, 50-50, or maybe even an increase. As far as what's trending right now, I think we're still doing good, but we were again very conservative. At first, we were going to flatline it, and at this point, we did 0.5% increase. Not what the inflation rate is, not 1%, not 1.5%, not something to make these books look better, but a very conservative figure, just because it looks like we are going to, we're doing a little bit better. And again, when we budgeted looking at actual revenues and what we thought we were going to get in 19, not necessarily what we budgeted in 19 to just add another 0.5% to that. It's more what we think we're going to get. So I think we're doing fine. I think you've got a very conservative yet good but balanced budget.
Page 7 of your summary statement, at the very bottom of the page, overall revenues will decrease by 0.37% over the fiscal year 19. But when you go to your general revenue, you increased it by almost $300,000.
What you're looking at, or that first statement is what I was trying to say in the beginning, was budget to budget,
Yes.
not actual.
Okay.
So
But
that's
you're
why we
telling-
say it's negative 37. And what page are you on?
Page 7, at the very bottom of the page. Then I jump back to your page 15 and
Okay,
look
hold.
at what you project for 2019 and project for 2020. You got a $300,000 increase in your revenue line. I'm sorry, that's the beginning arrangement. I apologize. You've got a $100,000 increase
Right,
to work with.
right.
Well, that's not a 0.37% decrease, 19 to 20.
Okay, I'm not sure what you're
Okay,
saying. And
so
that's,
you need to look at page 15.
Right.
I'm looking at page 15,
And then
and we're on
when
line
you-
3.
When you look at proposed 2020
Yeah,
to 2019 budget, you notice there's a decrease in those numbers?
in the
Okay.
revenues.
Your revenues, do you notice the decrease?
I see the decrease. I was going with
That's
where
the
your
percentage.
estimates were to close out the year.
No, it's budget to budget, like she said.
Okay,
That's where that
all right,
negative 0.37 comes from.
thank you.
I'm still on page 15, and I'm correct that the column that's on the far right, where it says budget percent change, that's a percentage of how the budget for that particular
Changed
line
from
has changed.
19 to 20.
From-
The budgeted numbers, the budgeted 19 to budgeted 20.
And is there, I mean, and so the ones that are larger than others kind of caught my eye. I mean, and again, I don't need to go through line by line, but if we went through category by category, starting with the general fund, are there any percent changes that the public, that we should be, particularly aware of? I mean, I'll take, for example, it looks, the seizure fund went down by 40%. I think that's because that's going away.
That's correct,
Would be-
and they've spent, that's what I was talking about last night, where the fund balance is anticipated to be at 28, I think I said 23, but it's 28,000. It will, that's what we anticipate it to be after we pay for that car this week. And then we don't, the police has chosen not to budget anything out of there and leave that 28,000 in there, and that's restricted. That's why it's restricted on there. It is, that also gets restricted in our CAFR. It is only to be used by state law for certain things, and it's only the police department. So that's why that minus 40%
Comes out.
yes, looks pretty gross, I guess. Expenditures in capital, you'll see, went up 26.29%, but you have to keep in mind capital, the capital improvement fund, it's not just cars and trucks and equipment. It's also the STP project is in there. And then on the flip side of that, we only budget 80% of those expenditures to get back in revenue. But that's part of the reason why that's 26% is because it also includes the STP project for Rosalie, right, Nan? Yes. Also in that capital, that's not Eric's capital. That's just everybody else's capital. And then debt service, that's part of that, expenditures in the capital. Stormwater, well, all of those percentage are all skewed, if you would, for lack of a better word, because of Brentwood Bound and the COPs, which is why I think, I don't want to speak for Bola, but she did put that in there trying to show you what it is without it. And I would love to separate that and just do Brentwood Bound and Stormwater and then Parks and Rec, but as we already had that conversation, the voters voted for that tax, and it clearly states Stormwater and Parks and Rec. So it has to be a combined fund in the way we're accounting for it. Without going in too much detail, our new software program can give me a little more ability to track and see things, but I can't split that stuff out in the fund. That's why Bola split it out for you in her transmittal letter.
Okay. Do you all have any questions on the revenues? So I had a question that came up last night. In the budget, it was estimated that the debt service for the 2019 COPS would be $3.2 million. And much to our delight, that debt service is going to be more in the neighborhood of $2.575 million. So maybe we got 600 grand a year that's found money, or what will we do with that?
It's not
Or-
found money.
We knew it was there.
It is in the Economic Development Fund, and it has to be used based on what the law says that fund can do, and it's limited. So it could pay more debt service. It's whatever the COP said. I think Mark Grimm went over that very well. So it stays in that fund and is only to be used for those things in that fund. And I will tell you that the higher numbers, everything that they talked about, the higher numbers, that's what's in this budget, because I certainly didn't have time to get it changed in 2 hours last night. But when the final budget comes out, it will have the corrected numbers, or the more accurate numbers in it.
But we are around 600,000 to the good.
Right, and what will
of
happen
we
is it'll show us in fund balance, in that fund, because we won't spend what we believe will come in.
Will your new accounting program make it easier to report and keep us current? Where this one starts out, or at least runs us 2019 only till the end of July. You would be able to print it and do it and say at the end of the month, we could get you to at least the October.
Just here's an example. I'm working on something somewhat complicated for the chief and for us to get money back to the federal government, but it's based on fiscal year of the federal government, which I think it's a fiscal year of the federal government. So they were asking for information from July 1st of 2018 to June 30th of 2019. That's not our fiscal year.
No.
Or I could just whip something off right and give it to them. I tested it yesterday. The old system, I had to run 3 reports, add this, subtract this to get a number. On the new report, I just went in, told it this, boom, and it spit it out. And the reason I checked it on the old system was I just wanted to see, was the new system right? And it came down to the penny. It took me longer just to figure out how to create that report than it did to do the report. Once it's in, boom, it pops and it spits it out, and I can download it into a PDF, and 2 kinds of Excel, so yes, much quicker, where that other one took me about 20 to 30 minutes to do. So it's a much better program.
Under the STP grants, you're budgeting that we are spending the money, because that's what we have to do first, and we get an 80% return. That return normally doesn't stay within that calendar year.
Right, and then what we do, but if so, I forget what you budgeted, 108,000 or something for that STP project, and so 80, and I remember this because I've seen these numbers, so $80,800 is what we budgeted in revenue. Well, if he doesn't get all that done in 2020, we can only ask for what we got back, or what we spent. Right, correct.
And the revenue may come in 2021.
Correct.
And we still float it back to this calendar.
Well, what we show it on the books is earned revenue in the year
It was
if we
spent.
keep on an accrual basis. If we
Okay.
do a cash basis, it's different.
STP projects are typically 3-year projects.
Yep.
Preliminary design, acquisition, construction. So there's a percentage of that 80 that the city would budget in terms of revenue coming in that will be reimbursed for each year of the 3
That
years.
comes in.
And then the 20% local match. So that's how we budget that in here.
This one, that SCP though is only 1 year, right?
No, Rosalie's
It's
over
3
3
years.
years.
Oh, we started a little bit this year.
Yeah, a little bit in 19, land acquisitions in 20,
20.
and in 21 we did construction.
Construction, right.
Where under the sewer improvement fund, there is a past due already, and I want to say it's 320
Right.
and something. Where is that reflected in there?
What, the 320?
Yeah, that I show it.
It's not in the budget because it's a balance sheet number.
Gotcha.
These are revenues and expenses. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So all you're gonna do is show, if we do it right, here's $22,000 that we can go to pay off that debt.
Right,
And that's all you're gonna show with this.
right. And
Okay.
if, let's just say at 20 or 21 or whatever, the next, say, 5 years from now, this fund starts growing, looks good at that 20,000 we've been paying, and we could go back to, for a budget amendment, and say, we'd like to pay 50 grand this year and just do a
If the
budget.
cash
amendment.
is there.
Right, right.
As far as the sewer lateral goes, you know, we're capped at 3,500 of what we'll spend per house, right? And
Yep,
so we're able
right.
to presumably do more than we were able to before if we were at our,
That's
from a
correct.
budget standpoint. How, do you have any idea, how are we trending there? I mean, are we hitting the mark, are we?
We're actually at budget, you know, I know last time I checked fundware, it was like a little over 100,000 in miscellaneous contractual.
Which means we did what, 20 somewhere, you know, less than what we budgeted for next year
Yeah,
so
I was
far.
gonna say roughly 30 repairs, because if you recall, January, February is when we still had the old policy, and then we did the resolution 1084.2, which changed it, took out cleaning and cabling. So January, February, we had, I think I calculated it was like $8,000 or $10,000 worth of cleaning that, you know, we won't have next year.
Could you go to the mic since this is being recorded?
Okay.
Thank you.
As I mentioned, in January, February, we actually had the old policy. So that was 1084.1. Then 1084.2 took away cleaning and cabling because we were paying roughly $42,000 a year for all that extra service with Gateway and others. So the new budget reflects that we don't do cabling and cleaning. We have $3,500 roughly, and we do 30 or so repairs at that high number. We just had a bill today, it's $2,800. You know, he's got a share that's in his basement and the rest of it's outside, which is covered, but he didn't hit the threshold. It's 2,800. So there's several of them that are that way.
How many of those were in Brentwood Forest?
I can look in my binder, but if I were to guess, I'd say 3 or 4 just in 2019. It's pretty small. It's pretty insignificant compared to the overall single-family homes.
The management is doing most of it in Brentwood Forest. They're not expecting this.
Correct, yeah. If there's a problem in Brentwood Forest, it would be limited to what's out in the street or in the right-of-way. You know, most of the problems that I've seen with Brentwood Forest were within the plumbing itself and the crawl space.
Underneath.
Right, it's underneath and it's very difficult. They usually have to cable it from the roof or pull a toilet because they don't have cleanouts for some odd reason, not all of them.
I would anticipate a bit of backlash if the legislature raises the ceiling for what taxpayers can be billed. Brentwood Forest residents don't see a lot of return on their $50 a year. So raising
Right.
that, just as a warning, might be not met with.
And if you recall, there's several hundred of them that are excluded from the program of the 1,425 units.
They've been paying and are more unhappy than the others, so
Yeah.
this is not it's not an upbeat sort of thing.
In the city's website, if you go, there's a link for just Brentwood Forest, and it'll tell you whether you're eligible or ineligible, depending on the number of units. Because if you recall, it's limited to 6 units per structure.
Oh, that's what started the whole
Yeah.
thing, but I just wanted to
Right.
warn you that there may be a backlash coming.
While we're on the, thank you, while we're on the sewer improvements, so what's the rationale that they think we'll only collect 111,000? If I do the math, that's 700, are they saying 740 people won't?
It's the rate at which people are paying, or lack thereof.
Well, we were just mostly starting with revenues. Does anyone, have any questions on that end? And I'll say how I would map this out, but I also am open to suggestion. I have one theme thing I would like to cover, and that is how the Prop P money is being spent. And I know that there are some overlap departments, but then other than that, I just assume go by department to start with big ticket items and your questions. Does that make sense, or would there be another? So as far as I'd like to just hear, generally how we're spending our Prop P money, and if it's best to.
So if it's okay with
Sure.
you, then maybe we start with Larry Covey, if you're prepared. There are a lot of expenses coming from Prop P that benefit both police and fire. And this has come about because of meetings that you've had with both. So if you just want to generally cover what's in the IT budget for those two departments.
And real quick, Larry, I'll just tell you, because this has been a moving target. Some things came out and changed, and I have not had time
I think
to
the
tell you.
things I'm aware of were the building security
Okay, so you
pieces of
know.
the fire department,
Very
the cameras and the
good.
badge access was removed.
That's
That's my
it.
understanding. Okay.
Good, okay.
Yeah, if you just would
Page 190,
direct us to.
which is, which rule is that?
So basically, anything that I budget for, it was page 190, did I hear? Is that what Prop P is on? Just so I could follow along with what you're looking at?
Okay,
Or, I'm sorry to keep interrupting you, Larry, or you can go to page 175, and you see the highlighted green?
Yeah.
It'll say miscellaneous Prop P fire. That's probably the first thing. And Larry, I don't think you have a book, so I'm gonna let you use mine if you want to. You can go and tell me right now, that's just your book.
Spreadsheet, yeah. Thank you. That's it. See? So this is the contractual, and then there's projects in
Right,
here
so you
somewhere.
flip those into if you want, or if you know right there, Prop P.
Okay.
And then you have projects, flip over, it's got Prop P by it.
Okay. So as far as what I have in the IT budget for Prop P, and I'm going to try and follow along here in the budget book. Basically, all the contractual expenses for police and fire for all of their software comes out of the Prop P account. On page 175, you can see the Prop P fire miscellaneous contractual totals and what they spend on the various different pieces of software and fire. And then, Karen, I don't see...
Right below it is Prop P.
For police,
Right.
but I don't see the detail, or I'm sorry, yeah, it's right below it. So there's fire and police, what they spend on their software, and their contractual and maintenance items throughout the year in each of the departments for both of those. And then,
Page 177, middle of the.
sorry guys, on page 177 is where you'll really see the projects. And it looks like, at least this book, Karen, I guess they've been removed, it just hasn't been updated yet, that there is the only project really related, we'll be getting a new wireless hotspot because they removed, assuming this is still in there, there was a project to add the citywide badge access system to the fire department and a project to add the citywide surveillance system to the fire department. And those were both cut from the budget for reasons I'm not sure of.
Balance the budget.
Well, yeah, that would be a big thing. But most of what's getting spent is in Prop P and police, which page 178.
Right, yeah.
You can see at the bottom there, the largest piece of that is $90,000, and that is to deploy a dash camera system in the police vehicles. It's actually been in the budget for a few years, and it's been pushed forward every year. So hopefully it gets approved this year, and we'll get to deploy those cameras, because as of right now, the officers have no recording capabilities for anything. Hopefully body-worn cameras are deployed this year as well in FY20, but that's through a grant with Regis, and that's why you don't see it in here.
Can I
Yes.
ask a diverting question? Prior to putting cameras in the cars,
Yep.
do we have a police policy of the cameras and stuff in it, like we did when we did the body cameras? That we established a policy of what's going to go on and how, and what our expectations are?
Yes.
So that's all done. Now, the body cameras, as you pointed out, was a Regis grant that came in last year. What's the cost of running those cameras this year for our 2020? Is that in the budget, and is that covered by Prop B, or is that covered by operating expense out of the department?
So the grant that's paying for the body worn cameras
Joe.
has been ongoing.
Sorry, Joe.
There's been ongoing problems with getting the body-worn camera piece, not the car cameras, the body-worn cameras.
Same as the city of St. Louis.
Yes, sir. And really, it's wrapped around storage, and the related cost of the storage, redaction, and the video and things like that are the issues there. Right now, it looks like they're going to get rolled out in January. We're still trying to work through the back-end storage, and Larry's really helped us do this. Right now, we're trying to price that out for what it's going to cost. The long run is the play here. This could cost up to $26,000 per year to the city of Brentwood, and we're trying to get around that. So we're looking at housing our own data, using a server that we think we can marry with the in-car camera process.
Is that estimated cost somewhere covered in your operating budget then, or is that going to be something that December of 2020, we're going to look at doing a budget amendment because now we know what we expended?
As Larry and I stand up here today, we're pretty confident that the server that we're going to buy will be able to house the data and save the city that $26,000 recurring revenue every year.
Okay.
Right now, that's the plan. So that's why you don't see it in there.
Yep. So,
And then The dash camera stuff would all go into that same server.
Correct.
Okay.
The vendor, Panasonic Arbitrator is the name of the software. It's a Panasonic product. Both the body cams and the dash cameras are that same product. So the videos can actually be synced up with one another, but it's all going to go to the same server. And like Chief said, we're trying to get around paying Regis connection and storage fees and do it ourselves in our own data center for, you know, the cost of the $26,000. For less than that, we could probably buy our own and have a 7-year useful life out of it instead of paying that cost every single year. And so that's what we're working on right now.
As far as, you know, what's been allocated for Prop P this year, what would you say is the breakdown between, you know, equipment, cap versus?
There's actually a
personnel?
chart on page 182, I think. Did I just say
183.
180, well, yeah, mine's on 182.
I think yours is, what's?
183 has got the.
Oh, yeah, you're right, I'm looking at an
Oh, yeah.
electronic version, that's. Anyway, 8250, just want to make sure it's the same number. So if you look at the top, the budgeted revenues, and that's the same number that's in your line item over in the general fund for county Prop P tax, sales tax, is $447,225. The next little orange box is what's being left in the general fund to pay for police and fire items. So the $194,070 is to pay for salary and benefits for Major Hawkins and the law enforcement analyst. Then there's an evidence technician that just the police, obviously, is responsible for. And then they have a current CALIA manager who is working to help them stay accredited, what they need to do. And the request this year was to add to that and make that person work more hours and be the emergency manager for the city. So those two costs for those two people is 60 grand, but of that portion, fire would be 10 grand and the police 50. That's the general fund. Capital fund is all the stuff you were just looking at that Larry talked about. So there's the miscellaneous contractual, police is 24,729, fire, I don't have to read all those numbers, but miscellaneous contractual, then there's computer, IT-related projects, and as you can see, that 90-something thousand is in that 113. And then there's just regular capital, and I think like police was ammunition and something else. So that totals it out, and the grand total is $438,000, and that leaves a balance of Prop P of $8,520. So if you look at that little line that says capital budget amount to transfer from general fund 184, that becomes an expense to the general fund as a transfer, and it gets moved over to capital to help capital improvement fund those capital items. So in a nutshell, that's what is happening with Prop P.
I'm not exactly sure where to bring this up, but I'm hearing, you know, issues with regard to, you know, the hiring of police officers, and it seems like Prop P would be a fund to look to. And I don't want to get over my skis because I haven't read any reports yet, but I've got a meeting coming up next week, and I'm not going to ask anyone to comment on a report that's not been made available, but I'm anticipating that there's going to be some feedback about, you know, finding money to hire police officers, and I just assume deal with it. And I don't know if that's, you know, I'd like a plan or a plan of attack if you know, to address that. Because I'm anticipating that, because I've already heard, you know, informally from some people that, you know, that it is important to them to have, you know, police officers be hired, and we need to run the traps on that. But, you know, for purposes of our discussing a budget, I guess kind of how should we approach that? I'm not marrying myself to, you know, doing it or not doing it, I wanna have a game plan.
Just let me get my book back.
Yeah.
Go for it, Bola.
I mean, if the answer is we're working on it, that's fine, I just wanna, I wanna have it in
if
front
that's
of
the
me.
direction, then we would have to work on it.
Okay.
And I would strongly recommend to do it, we not go into fund balance. If you read the transmittal letter, I think I emphasize very strongly in there that Standard & Poor's has indicated they're gonna be coming back in 2 years. So whatever we have to do, we would need to find a way to fund it without going into fund balance. Unless, philosophically, the board disagrees with that, and they direct staff to go into fund balance to do that. So those are the options.
But your question is, if you're not using it from the Prop P money, where else do you get money to
Well,
cover
to
the
use it from
cost?
the Prop P, we have to reduce the
I was gonna say,
expenses that are in Prop P.
Then you have to take out all the computers.
And the average officer, you said yesterday, cost about 80,000, so
Plus
160.
benefits.
I think that includes benefits, does
Yeah,
it?
that includes benefits.
Okay,
Oh, does it?
so
Because
we-
if it didn't,
if it's
I
gonna
don't
come
think
from Prop P, then we need to cut 160,000 in here to make it work.
So and I don't know if the plan is that we know I just, kind of want to face it head on. I mean, if that's
Sure.
gonna be something that we deal with, I mean, is the marching order then, we need to
We go back and
go
talk to
back
the
to the drawing
departments.
board and find out where we get find that money. I mean,
We asked the departments, which would really be police and fire and IT, to go back, since it's their budget, come back with cuts that get us the 160.
and I will take my cue from the experts, but Prop P seems like an obvious fund because it's constant, and, it's.
And
police
just in case
salary.
this comes up, if they chose not to cut the capital portion of Prop P, that would mean Capital Improvement Fund itself funded those things, not Prop P. Which would mean, in a nutshell, that 184 that we transfer would stay in the general fund to do what you needed to do for what, I'm not gonna say it's 2 more officers, but it's that. And that would mean capital would have to fund that, and if you did that, then you're gonna, if you go to your page 15, you'd have to take out of revenue for capital, that $100 and something thousand, and then
Oh, wait, I'm like
on page 15, which is that overview,
not for Spaniel,
Right.
I'm a little slow when it comes to
Right.
stuff. So, can you start again with page 15, what we'd have to do?
right. So if somewhere down, if in this discussion, somebody decides that we're not gonna cut anything, but we're gonna add 2 police officers, and we're gonna pay it out of Prop P. What that means is that 184,000, or whatever that number was that we say we're transferring from the general fund, would stay in the general fund.
Okay,
Which means on the capital line item for revenue, you would have to reduce that number by $184,000. And if you look at that and you reduce that, then you're going into capital's fund balance.
okay.
But you would not be doing the general fund's fund balance. You would not be touching the general, well, you'd actually be increasing it because you're leaving money in it. But you would be decreasing the fund balance unless you cut those things that made up that 184,000, and then we're right back to apples, taking from here and paying there.
Mechanically, and your answer to me can be, we'll get back to you if you're not ready for a response, that's fine.
We
I
can
mean,
bring
but
something back on Thursday.
If that, well, just I'm anticipating, I've got the meeting on Thursday, and then we've got the first, board meeting in December where this is gonna be presented. If that's gonna if something happens, and I don't know if it's going to, what does that mean? I tend to agree with the process of experts. You go huddle up, find out what you cut, find out what you do, and come back to us. But what is that between now and, the second meeting, Board of Aldermen meeting in December, so that we can have an approved budget for
So
2020?
there's another
What does that
meeting on
look
the
like?
25th.
Okay,
And I think at that meeting, your recommendation could be present option A to
Okay.
the board or present option B. based on the outcome of the meeting on the 26th.
So I would have to predict the future on the
Yes, you would.
26th. Okay, well, that's,
But
I mean, that
Not
gives you,
impossible.
so it would be option A, which is what's in the current budget today. Option B, what the departments proposed, either to find cuts in Prop P to make it work, or as option C, as Karen said, would be not to transfer the 184 and then have the additional expenditures come from capital, but what that means is we would be going into fund balance. So you might want to think about those three options now, so that maybe when we come to the meeting on Thursday, you kind of have a feel for which one of those options, you know, you really want. Is it B or is it C?
your dilemma with your solution is you funded it for the 2020 year, but you don't have revenues to sustain it every year after. You have to still find
If
a
you go-
revenue source.
If you go with option C, what that does
I burn
is-
down the reserves.
You do, or you limit what you are spending on capital.
What reserves are you talking
Well, you've got a $4 million
Capital
reserve type thing, but if I keep taking 180,000 out every year, I keep burning into it. Instead of building it up to get to where our budget policy would be, I'm gonna keep working it down. What I'm looking for is, if you want to do this, yeah, I can cut this budget and I can find you $180,000, because we just put off whatever we're spending to some other year and we fund two people. But eventually, I have to find a revenue source to cover that cost.
Potentially you do, yes.
And I'm going, isn't that part of what you need to do before you can present to me A, B, or C?
We would also do that.
You gotta find me that revenue source.
We would do that.
Okay.
Alderman Dyson?
So I have a question. So are you anticipating in future years transferring like 180,000 into capital? Or is this a one-year thing that you're trying to transfer?
You would have to continue to balance it out, 21 and 22. Right now, you know, we projected that, I'm gonna keep going back to that chart that's got the green bars.
Mm-hmm.
They've gone out and said, here's what we want this year and this year and the following years. And they would either have to move things out, change it, say, I'm
They
gonna
would
do
either
without
have to
it,
defer it
or cut it.
for a
Yeah.
long period of time or not do it at all.
Okay, so, but my question is, like, last year, we transfer, how much Prop P money did we transfer into capital last year? Did you just transfer the 184 because there was $184,000 worth of ask that there wasn't money for in capital, so you found money in, I mean, it's legitimate Prop P.
We only
spending,
transfer
but-
what has been budgeted in capital for Prop P. That's all we transfer. The rest of it stays to cover those other positions that I talked about.
Right, so it's the 400,000 in Prop P minus the cost for the two positions and the contractual employees, then the balance can be used to fund their capital requests. That's how
That's
it
how
works.
it's done, okay.
Yeah.
So then my next question, sorry. So on the, when Standard & Poor's comes back and looks, are they looking at all of our fund balances or just the general fund?
They look at all.
At all. Okay. Thank you.
I've had a basic question. There was no request for additional officers listed in this budget, so why are we talking about two additional positions?
well, it, just because it's not budgeted doesn't mean it wasn't requested, and I can
The
tell you-
department requested it,
requested
and
it.
public safety had a discussion about it, and then we found savings to have CPSM, remember CPSM? They're the law enforcement agency that came and did the workload measurement analysis in 2016. So before a decision, I think, was kind of made, the committee asked that we engage them to come and look at the workload from back then to see if it's changed. So they're in the process of finalizing that report, and as soon as I get it, I will distribute it. And so, you know, initially when we started talking about how this budget process would go, knowing fully well that there were a lot of requests and we only had a limited amount of money, I mean, we did have to cut some things. we did have to defer some things to subsequent years. That's how we are able to produce for you a balanced budget.
So Ways and Means is presented with what you have put in a balanced budget, but
Yes.
we don't have any list of items that departments have requested that are not in this.
Most of what they've requested have been funded. The things that are not funded are budgeted in other years. For instance, if you go to the 5-year capital plan, it starts, I think, page 180. If you go to 180, it lists, and this is for streets. So it lists all the street projects that Dan has planned. When Dan submitted his budget, all those numbers that you see, are you at page 180?
Yes.
All those numbers that you see on that second column, which is 2021, for street engineering, well, not street engineering, starting at surface sealant and elite, all the way to surface sealant woodsy, and remove and replace concrete park ridge, and
All those things in that column.
all
that
those
have
things
been
in that
next year.
column, he budgeted and requested for it in 2020.
And then they were simply moved. Okay.
And so
It would be helpful in future years to have a list of what didn't get included. Just to see.
Well, I think a lot of that work, I think it should be left with the department. And generally, I plan on asking if there's some big ticket items that didn't make the cut, and they'll talk about it. But
we have
we
a
are
budget
essentially
that-
looking at a balanced
Right,
budget. but-
it is balanced. We have the budget that Karen first put together based on all the requests, and then we meet with the departments, and then we start to have a discussion. What makes sense for you to push off to 2020?
I see this as just because I'm not marrying myself to a position tonight, and I want to resist the temptation to fall totally into this rabbit hole. But I just didn't want to be flat-footed if there was a recommendation that came back and an opinion that's how it should flow. I'm asking for options
So
from a
you've
budget standpoint.
issued the challenge to Chief Curtin, Chief Spees, and Larry Coffey. You all need to not meet together, but, take a look at and Ronnie, take a look at your individual departments and look at what you can defer. I'd want to say, look at, I don't know, I'm just throwing this out, if a 15% cut from each department will get us there. And Karen can run those numbers and tell you what percentage cut we need to get us to the 160. That's a start.
May I ask a naive question?
Sure.
Like, say the Board of Aldermen doesn't get new iPads next year, is that,
Well, Larry can speak to the cost of what that is.
it's not much, but can things be cut in other areas? Like, or
That's a good question.
I'm new, so I.
There are a lot of
can't ask all these
options, and I'm certainly not suggesting this, I'm just telling you, salaries could be cut or frozen, there's all kind of things that can be done, but yes, it can be.
I assume, and I wanted to have a conversation now and not December 1st, so,
Right.
and this could be
Right.
or not, but I just want to keep it in front of me.
Yeah.
And the approach I prefer to take is to put the onus on all of you, find people I think you're best suited to know your budget and what things can be deferred and what,
So one thing you said, I don't know who said it, other departments, Nancy, other departments, there are, so police, fire, public works are our biggest departments, if you look at the total budget. So when you start looking at an admin, or you start looking at planning, what do we cut? If not people, it's professional development, it's training, it's travel, it's memberships. So, and usually when budgets are tight, as a matter of practice, those are things that you strip out of your budget just to be able to provide services to your community. So if you're also directing us that, hey, maybe first take a look at those 3 departments and then see if they're, and mind you, we already did that. So what we try to do is keep our training budget from growing, keep our travel budget from growing, But for instance, if you look at the police department, there's emphasis on professional development. So there's about an additional 14,400 that was coming from asset forfeiture. And you know, we no longer have an officer in DEA, so that revenue is not coming in, and the revenue that we had was what we used to buy the other vehicle this year. So instead of that money being spent out of asset, it's now being spent out of general fund. So we can come back certainly with the option D, option E.
I don't want to be, you know, I'm asking now so there's a little runway, that, you know, because I see this in the offing, and I would just rather be,
We'll take a
you know,
look at it,
you
bring
know,
something back Thursday.
you know, if that's, you know, it could be, maybe it's a moot point, I don't know,
And,
but.
you know, I think that I should expect a little pushback from departments, you know, like, they might even find places that
Well,
we
you all
don't
can
know
Thunderdome
about.
that, like,
So
in
just-
private, but I just, like.
Just to give you an idea, and it's sort of, I guess, in closing on this particular, so if you go to page 175 and then page 180, particularly 180, look at 180 at the bottom. That is revenues over expenditures for each of those years. If you see in the middle column, whatever that, it's
Wait, we're
2022.
on 180?
Yes, at the bottom. A
Net
little
gain?
bit, we're gonna go into fund balance, $9,100.
Okay.
Okay? That's what that means. The total revenue over the total expenditures that we're anticipating out in those years, a little bit over. If you want to get a general idea, everything over on page 175 under transfer in, all those numbers, that's Prop P. So if you take out that, if you take out 184, 635, then under 2020, then you need to subtract it from that little bit of $29,000, and that's what we would go in to fund balance.
That was my question earlier, thank you.
And you can do it for all 5 of those years and see it. So as you can see, in the second year, we're thinking that's 153, so that looks like that'd be a wash. And this sort of goes to what you're saying too, Alderman Leahy.
Give
The
you a
next-
source of funding.
Exactly, 272, 147, we're still not gonna, in the 2023. We'd still not be in fund balance, and then it looks like in 2024, there's nothing for Prop P been budgeted in capital. I was noticing that too, but that's Larry's numbers, I was looking at them, and it looks like whatever you guys are wanting to do are getting done. So that's another quick way for you to be able to look at how Prop P is. Prop P's, it's really not complicated, but it is because it's in 2 different funds. So that gives you an idea of what's out there.
I mean, in other communities, because it varies from city to city, some have used Prop P primarily for police. Others have used it for anything tied to a public safety type of function. So that would be fire, that would even include public works, that would include dispatch. So generally, when we started receiving the Prop P money, how many years has it been now? 2 years? Is this the second year?
This is 17, we got 2 months worth. 18, we got all year. 19, yeah.
So, you know, we've started spending it on salaries for the most part. But if you tie it up with salaries, you've just tied up that revenue source. And it's, but we'll come back.
Yeah, I just
Thursday.
generally, I mean, the direction, I just want to be ready for the issue, that's all.
think
You
that's
know,
good
and if the end result is we had the conversation and the stand, you know, I just want us to be able to look back at this moment and say we thought about it.
So you wanted options or whatever for Thursday's meeting at noon? Okay.
Well, whatever
We're
the,
gonna try our darn best.
you know, I mean, or what, if the answer is you need more time, I don't want
Right.
to,
I mean,
my
so
aim
there's
is
a
not to
meeting
make
for the
your life,
25th.
you know, miserable.
So maybe we
It's,
shoot for the 25th.
if the 25th, this is,
When's your guys' meeting?
I've got a meeting on this issue on the
26th.
26th, and I have a sense of where it's going, and I'd like to just be ready so we can adjust and something, or have a sort of clear and cogent reason why we aren't changing anything.
Okay.
Be as, you know,
Maybe
deferring to that.
we might need a little bit more
So-
time just to, you know, give Karen
You guys need more
room, to
time?
give the chiefs room, Dan, should we add you to that group? Just joking.
Just keep driving that 1994 truck. We're done.
Well,
So, okay, so then that's in the mix, in the works. So I guess that was sort of the only like thematic, topic I wanted to cover. So I just assume pivot now to, departments, And
I will say that was the biggest cuts, I believe. So two police officers, off the top of my head, there were, the street projects were moved, and then, education.
Yeah, tuition reimbursements, we lowered that to 3,000 per department.
Which is one
And
person.
One person, and then we tried to make sure that professional development wasn't growing significantly. So, that's what we did. So, to the next phase of this discussion, as it impacts the capital, Dan, do you want to go first? Or are you ready, or who's ready?
Does someone on the committee feel passionate about
Who goes first?
Anything in particular?
what we tackle first?
So Larry will not be here at the next meeting because he just talked about IT related, so unless you have specific, well, actually, he will be, because we're bringing for something else.
Okay.
Dan, why don't you go? So,
And I probably will say this to everyone, big ticket items, things that didn't make the cut or were deferred that you feel are worth mentioning.
Okay.
I don't need that line by line, but we'll start there and see where we land, and then the extent to which you all have questions, we'll drill in. Does that
Okay.
seem to work?
Yeah, because I didn't know if you had any questions about the individual department ones, whether it's streets, sanitation, sewer. I know we kind of went over some of it early on, like as far as like sewer lateral. You know that the county assets didn't change. Miscellaneous contractual, that did change. I don't know if there's specific questions about those.
What page are you on?
I was looking at the individual ones, which I think it's,
Dan, do you have a book?
I'm at 160.
yeah, I've got it pulled up, the digital one.
Want a book right here?
163 department.
Yeah, I'm just using my finger. Yeah, I'm on capital, but
you're on capital.
Oh, you're on
Yeah.
capital. Oh, you're on capital.
yeah, I didn't know if you had, like, before capital is the individual departments.
Yes, is the public works sanitation.
Right, that's where,
You want to stay in capital.
yeah, we can go to capital. I just didn't know if you had anything before
Let's
that.
go to capital.
Okay, that's
We
fine.
didn't cut anything.
Let's go to
No.
capital. Not all.
Yeah, I just knew you said prepare if you
Yeah.
wanted to talk about things that
Unless they
changed.
ask the questions, let's just go to capital.
Okay. Yeah, as far as high-level capital, some of the things you'll see, I wrote notes on here. We reduced like our sign budget. We buy signs year over year. So typically that was 20,000, it's 15. We've replaced a big chunk of signs. We always keep spares at Public Works. So year over year, we replace things from stop signs, the regular street signs. We do have some savings when we can reface a stop sign,
176,
put stickers. Some of the other big ticket items would be like the Ameren lights. We budgeted for 20, actually we budgeted last year, we paid for the lights, we paid for the wiring. In 2020, what I plan on doing is having some money aside because we never got to the ones with York Village, so I need carryover for those 5. Plus I have some budget that would allow me to purchase solar. We did purchase solar this year, we haven't received them yet, we will. Probably like in another week, we'll have those the end of November, beginning December. So those will be booked in 2019. And if they're successful, what I'd like to do is use money to put in solar because I can control my destiny better than I can with Ameren because I have to have conduit in by an outside contractor, then I have to coordinate with them to pull wires and put up street lights. And then I'm obligated to pay a bill for perpetuity's sake. So.
But as you point out, are in this budget right now, may I jump in?
Sure.
Thank you. There's $50,000 to put in the capital budget to do the lights.
Correct, yeah, I don't want
You're
to.
looking at a portion of those going into York Woods. But I raised the issue with the city at the Board of Alderman meeting that we have a problem with the costs that you're using. because we have no right-of-ways to put any of those lights in at present. And
Right.
I don't think that cost is in your budget. I think your cost is covering just putting in the poles and a light, but we haven't got the right-of-way, we haven't got any power to it.
Yeah, the right of way was assuming that they would donate it if they want the light.
Assumption.
Yeah.
But the problem is now, and the lemon that we have, as I've raised, York Woods is its own private
So the board
venture.
really needs to vote to direct the city that we actually do want to put those lights in York Village, and then we can have another discussion, are his numbers accurate, or we're not putting in Ameren lights, we're putting in solar lights, so we think the cost will be less. So there's a lot of moving parts to that.
Yes, there
but
are. And
The
I-
initial decision has to be made by the board that, yes, we want to put in these lights in York Village.
Didn't we already pass something? saying-
No, we did
For
not.
every other, within
Discussed it.
other areas,
Passed
you
it.
discussed it, you didn't vote. It
We
was
never
deferred.
passed it, because there is a state statute that prevents us from using public money on private
Private
properties, and that hasn't been resolved yet.
Okay.
And that changes the cost of that program. The argument that we had in the discussion is lights are a safety issue. That's a good thing. The dilemma is how to get there with a cost arrangement, and we don't have it to make it work.
Go ahead, Dan.
Okay, some of the other things that are carryovers, we have them year over year, would be like equipment. So there's always something that breaks, needs to be replaced or upgraded, whether it's, pressure washer, hoses, chainsaws, things of that nature, because we use chainsaws year over year to clean out the creek. So we clean around Marshall and Brentwood Boulevard, we also clean at Breckenridge Industrial, and then this year I know we cleaned the promenade area, basically from Strassner going north. Some of the other things, carryover would be the skid steer, pavement breaker. I didn't buy it this year, I don't plan on it, but I'd still like to buy it next year. A concrete planer, we don't have one, we typically rent one. And there's enough areas that we see a need, whether it's a sidewalk, a street, to change the slope. If we can grind on a sidewalk, maybe we eliminate a trip hazard without eliminating the sidewalk itself. Traffic calming devices, that line went up at the direction of public safety. What that would include would be like the flashing speed limit signs. There's one on Pine, there's one at Rosalie near Eulalie. We only had budget for 2 of those. Seems like the public likes those, so we'd put enough budget in there in case you needed a couple of them in each ward, or if you went with some other traffic calming devices somewhere else. It doesn't necessarily have to be that, but you need to look at the specific scenario and figure out what you need. You don't want to have nothing in there, or too little, like 10,000, because those signs can be thousands by themselves.
You've got
So-
$25,000 in to fix or replace a couple of the old bay doors in the city hall.
That is correct.
The dilemma I'm looking at, is that just for the door itself, or is that putting in a whole mechanism?
It's the whole mechanism. It's the track, it's the motor, it's the door. Because over time, what's happened is those are wooden doors, and you can go up there now and you can see it's compressing on the bottom panels because that weight's pushing on there. I'm just afraid you'll use it too much and the piece will break off and
Do
injure.
we have a remodeling project coming up to address that portion
No.
of City Hall?
Mhm.
I mean, it's like putting money into something and then go, in 2 years, we're gonna tear it out and put something else in there, type thing. I was trying to see if we're working a long-term plan of spending.
We're not.
Okay, so it's just a moment.
Yeah, and the City Hall maintenance budget, the 6505 subcategory doesn't allow enough money. If I bought just those doors, I would blow through
The whole
that
thing.
entire line.
2
Yeah, and I need that line to cover, like rooftop unit goes out, or you had an issue with a toilet or something of that nature.
Okay.
Some of the other things which you're aware of would be like the customer service improvements. If you recall, that was budgeted over 2 cycles, 19 and 20. J.E. Foster started back in September, like slightly after Labor Day. Another carryover at City Hall would be the ADA sidewalk improvements over on the library side. So if you go over there now, you'll see there's the switchback ramps on the Brentwood Boulevard side. Over on the north side by the transformer, they repurposed some of those stalls. Those will be restriped, and those will be van accessible. There'll be 2 stalls there. So we lost 1 stall, but we gained 2 van accessible. You'll be able to take those from that ADA stall all the way up to the front door and in through the front door will be at one level. Assuming the receptionist buzzes you in, you would wheel or be transported up another ramp, and then on that first level you'll be at the proper elevation. There are, I think, like 7 different elevation changes to get you into City Hall's front door. So this makes everything ADA compatible, and then the library side, part of it is compatible, part of it isn't. I don't know when it was constructed, but what they'll do is eliminate some of the bushes, they'll widen the sidewalk, they'll lower the slope, and then they'll dedicate the stalls for ADA van accessibility. There are stalls on that side, but they don't meet the van accessibility. You need a little wider aisle. So, go ahead.
No, continue. I don't want to.
Oh, no, yeah, I was just saying, it's like, there's also the slight remodel area of the old planning and development area, because we need to make room for a city administrator office and a deputy clerk office, since that wasn't in the 19 budget. It was, but it's a carryover into 20. And then some furniture, we've got that dollar amount in there, and we're going to try our best to repurpose some of the things that people already have.
Cut.
Right, exactly. It was reduced. Yeah, that's good to know.
It's
Yeah.
36,000.
It was higher.
No, it was 45,000.
Yeah, I asked for a higher number and I got that. So I'm going to try to work within that and get it lower on our side.
If we have to build it ourselves.
Right.
The Amish do it.
And then the other 2 bigger ticket items would be fleet, truck 76, truck 71, 70. We have the evaluations. These have been in the fleet for quite a number of years, especially 71. That's a 1994 GMC. So it doesn't get used much. It doesn't have many miles, but it's because a lot of equipment for it's obsolete, whether it's the plow, the spreader. It doesn't really see duty, and I'd like to get it repurposed and buy a smaller truck so it can go on more streets. We've got plenty of big 2-ton dump trucks. I'd prefer to have a 1-ton smaller truck that fits on your Douglas Cord or fits on, Eulalie or something like that.
And I assume, the new truck purchase, we ran traps on that, went through the committee, it's needed, they're old.
Right. Yeah, and that's why I was saying it goes through the fleet evaluation process. There's a report, an evaluation report, and then those go to Poland.
Can we skip to the survey of city properties? Because
Yes.
somewhere in your budget, you increased the budget to pave the path to nowhere on Park Ridge. So we had, I thought, waited to put those in a budget until we knew really who owned them and if we could get out of those. You said there were several other.
Park Ridge, we picked up the plat for it. That one you're talking about is just north of Litzinger. It runs east and west. That's publicly platted. It's dedicated to the city of Brentwood. We own it. We're supposed to maintain it.
Can we get rid of it? Can we donate it to the residents?
We've asked that question of
Kevin O'Keefe.
And it's not something that he recommends.
Even if he doesn't recommend it, can we do it anyway?
The city has done it in the past.
Then what?
Well,
Vacated.
So there is
It's
in the
basically paving
budget
people's driveways.
a surveying of city properties. So we've gone out to bid.
Right, there's RFQ.
Eric is handling that part for us. So we will have the results of that bidding process and bring that to Public Works at the December meeting. So we'll have a better idea on what it costs. We had an initial cost, but there were some elements that we wanted that were not in the original RFQ. So we had to rebid it. I mean, it's an expensive proposition, and there are residents who want the city to repair those trails. They indicate to us that there are an average of 50 people or more a day that walk some of these trails.
Not the one on Park Ridge.
No, but all these other
ones. So we have to rely on them telling us because, we're not there. We don't live in the community. So we need to know what the cost is to do it, and that's what that $35,000 is for. Then we can come back and then the committee can prioritize which one of these trails they want us to repair first.
Can we not pave over something that goes nowhere until we finish a survey and see if we really can?
That will be a consideration for Alderman Loeffler. We will.
Yeah.
Got that?
That's kind of dozing off.
Can't understand why. If we pave some, put is essentially somebody's
Park Ridge.
driveway because it is a path to nowhere. And residents find out, it's gonna be the same thing they did in Alaska. You're building a bridge to nowhere. I can't see spending $19,000 of city money to pave something that is basically somebody's driveway. If we can hold off on that and see if we can,
Yeah, I don't think we would do something like that.
it's in the budget.
Well, it's just a line item for
$19,000
survey.
in the budget.
We haven't spent it yet, and I think
Right.
those kind of questions should really go before
survey.
public.
For the
That's separate from the
Not
survey.
really.
You're
Yeah.
mixing two things.
Well, I'm
Yeah.
saying if we hold off on that until we get the results of the survey, we don't.
We
need to
will.
look at it.
Yeah.
And all you have to do is just give us that kind of instruction. Where in the budget is 19,000 for?
Oh,
It is, it's on 173.
Right.
It's under streets and sidewalks 6535.
It goes to
Park
several
Ridge Alley.
driveways. I mean, there's-
Basically, those were
there's ones that
carryovers.
can get to their driveway
Yeah.
if it's-
Well, then they ought to own that and have that as their property, not ours. We shouldn't have to.
Yeah, and it was platted in 1929, and there's actually, it's not paved, but to the east of there, it goes across in both directions. It was Park Ridge Addition
Yeah.
in the 20s.
Alley.
Yeah, and it said forever, their successors in the signs, and
I remember you
yeah.
bringing that up before.
Because it was on our agenda. It
Yes.
was,
Yeah.
and I went down
Yes.
to look at it.
We will get a written opinion from the city attorney.
Well,
Yeah.
we don't always have to agree with the city attorney.
No, you don't.
It's a $19,000 line item in a very
Right.
large budget, so are we good, do we have any,
We're
do you have any
1/10.
questions, or can we go on?
1/10 of the way to 2 officers.
Point.
Alderwoman Tice.
So, may I ask questions about non-capital items? Are you gonna go through your other?
Yes.
If you want to, yeah, that's why I wasn't sure where you want to start.
Okay.
But
Before-
Can I
okay.
do one more?
Yeah.
If you had to remove any of these, would the traffic, the duplicate or the extra traffic signs, electric signs, be something that we could do without and make do with the two we have already?
They are transportable in the sense that you can buy a bracket and put it on a post, and you can interchange them. Like if you, say you notice speeding on Park Ridge in a segment, you can remove the one over on Pine and put it on a post and bracket over there. You just won't be covering Pine. So if you buy, say, half of these and you only spent 12,000, they are interchangeable in the sense that they can be moved around. You know, it's just a solar panel on top. It connects to a CPU, you know, a little computerized system in there, and that's pretty much it. You know, I just need to make sure utilities are clear. We call utilities ahead. If it's clear, we pound the post and mount it.
You've gotten a lot of positive.
You know, it's not like a speed table or something where I mount it down and I have to pull it back up.
I think they're great. It's just that if we were looking for any way, we could make do with the ones we have and move them around.
You can. I know, like Richmond Heights, there's like a program that they have. You can ask for them to be moved in your neighborhood. And, you know, it's effective at stopping, or not stopping, but slowing people down. But as soon as you pull it back, I'm sure old habits come back.
So we're trying to fund 2 for every ward.
Right.
So what is the average cost?
They're about 2,000, 2,000 to 3,000
So we
each.
have about 25,000.
Yeah, I'm looking for a cheaper alternative than the ones we bought.
All right. So-
Thank you.
Alderwoman Tice.
So I'm looking back at your regular, your street, how about your street department budget?
Which page?
So I'm on page 163.
Okay.
So I have several questions. So on the streets, you have the same employee number, but your salary's gone up. Your overall budget from budget 19 to 20 has gone up 5.7%. Most of that's in salary, so you have a $77,000 increase in the personnel services section, and I was just curious why you have the same number of employees with $77,000 more expense.
66.
So you're looking just at streets?
Just looking at streets.
So like account number
I'm
6,000.
comparing so this year budget was 971,000, and next year's proposed budget is $1,048,000.
And part of that, Dan, is because you moved overtime from.
But I incorporated, I'm doing the
And then
collective.
you have 2 employees that you are looking, if possible, to promote
Mhm.
from maintenance worker 1 to maintenance worker 2.
Yeah, it looks like benefits jumped up too. It's 201,500 versus 244,529. but I believe you guys calculate that, so,
Again, sure.
right.
So so people are getting promotions.
So it's a
To account for the-
reclassification.
Right.
It's not additional positions, it's a reclassification of existing.
Okay, so that accounts for the 7%. Then, and then on the, I have some sanitation questions.
Every department.
So the solid waste disposal,
Mhm.
6290, the explanation talks about recycling and the fees of 115 a ton. So, and that looks, so that line looks like it's up 35,000 from last year. And my question is that up because of our contract with them, or is that up because we have bad recycling and we're not?
It's
doing
up because
recycling?
we're going up month over month, so I did bring that with me, my own little
So that's
cheat
just the
sheet.
contract, we're in that, like that's,
Right.
okay, so that's.
Pay more for
For-
recycling.
Right, we originally paid the 115 a ton, and then whenever they sell it, then whatever the commodity rate is, whether it's aluminum, steel, whatever it is that they've recycled, then they give you a portion back.
Okay.
So I know I keep a Excel table, and it shows month over month how much per ton it wound up reducing it. So February was $90.23. They originally charged you $115. They sold the goods. It wound up reducing it down to $90.23. But then the most recent one, it's $99.48. So it's almost $100. So it's gone up $10 a ton. But we're still recycling about the same rate. You know, usually it's like 650 tons for a year. So then looking at it in terms of numbers, solid waste, which would be your regular trash, by dollar amount was like 48.6%. Recycles like 31%, and then yard waste is 20%
Percent of your.
of the dollar amount.
Dollar amount, okay.
But by volume or tonnage, whatever you want to look at, the amount that you actually collect, recycling, we only extract like 24% of the waste stream, but we pay 31% of the dollars, which makes sense because you're paying more per ton. It's almost 2 to 1 recycle versus regular trash going to a landfill. But you're obligated to do recycling in St. Louis County. You can't just stop doing it. And recall when we weren't, and I don't want
I
to,
wasn't here.
yeah,
Dan,
okay.
do we have a projection of doing a better effort at where we're going with the recycling? Is something gonna open up, hopefully next year, that will get us back into more of?
Yeah, right now,
this?
there's
I mean,
nothing
do we have somebody that
available.
will take it?
Right now, the only game in town is Republic, but I know that University City's looking at reopening up one of their recycling centers to maybe take some local, which would be someone like us. But they haven't fully vetted it. I mean, it's still down the road. It's not 2020. It may not even be 2021.
If we looked at, instead of curbside pickup, and started establishing places to collect specific, would that help us dispose of and get a better return versus making it a conglomerate?
Well, I know the county ordinance says we have to offer the curbside, but I think what you're saying is like a dumpster, like you see the paper retrievers and things like
Yeah,
that.
if I can get people to add to that, I have less tonnage pickup that I'd have to pay the waste to hopefully get
Right.
recycling, and I can go into here. All that generates some revenue changes.
Right. Yeah, the big one, if people would focus in on it, would be glass, because glass, you know, its
It's heavy.
density is greater than paper, so of course its weight is greater. So I could have a recycled tote full of glass, of course it weighs more than a recycled tote full of paper. So if I can at least get that glass out of the waste stream and it's solely glass, there are Strategic Glass, a couple other places they buy glass. And I know if you can guarantee a certain tonnage, they'll drop off the receptacle, which would be a dumpster, and they'll haul it if they can be guaranteed a revenue stream that covers
So
their
this is
costs.
stuff that you may be looking at and bringing to the Public Works Committee as something for
Right.
discussion.
Yeah, I submitted a grant last year and I didn't get approved for it, but it was for glass recycling.
Okay.
Just because I thought, well, then if people are kind enough to keep their glass in a little tote or something and just dump it out there and not put it in the curbside, it would save us money.
Yep.
And might generate revenue, but it didn't go. We can apply again, just keep trying, see what sticks.
Questions?
I had a quick question just on the streets and sidewalks, the one on page 180, the surface sealant. sort of broad category that's being deferred to next year. Full disclosure, I think that the street I live on is actually in that category.
Yeah.
So that's the milling, the work that we did to those streets.
Those were
good.
15 mill and overlays.
That can float to the 2021 without the sealant, and the street will be okay.
Right, and we still want to seal it by 2021, because then you're still preserving the integrity. You know, we crack seal, but crack sealing just sees what you see, which would be surface cracks. Any finer cracks that you don't see, the surface sealant covers over, because it's, you know, a couple of fractions of an inch thick, and it goes from curb to curb. And think of like what we did over on Helen, Manderley, Lawndale, Madge. You know, we've done this sealant over and over, and Missouri American's going to cut into Joseph. And I was like, well, if you're going to cut into Joseph, that was done 2 years ago as a sealant, you'll have to reseal it curb to curb, which they plan on doing. So it's just to keep the integrity there, so that in 10 years you still have a good street, and maybe you just keep applying sealants. If you did nothing, in 10 or 12 years, it'll probably pit and then start to degrade, because water gets in there and you get potholes.
Okay.
So,
There's nothing on here that I see about replacing or doing anything with a lot of the streets in Hanley Industrial except Strassner.
oh, there's ice cream specialties too, which would be Hanley Industrial, like
That's
we're,
just a tiny piece. And
But
the
it's a-
streets-
yeah, it's a lot of concrete slabs.
I'm sorry?
275,000.
Yeah,
But it needs to be done. They're the worst streets in the city.
Agreed.
Are they public streets, so that really is
The
our
one we're doing is a
responsibility?
public street,
right,
yes.
for certain.
So if we tried to do the whole loop there, Strassner's in the middle, if we did the loop around, we do have, those are all city streets.
Yeah, the Strassner one is, that's the 1336, I believe is the address. It would be, if I believe correctly, it'd be like slightly west of the intersection of Strassner and Hanley Industrial, like that section, I think is
But
1337.
we're doing just piecemeal. We don't have.
Yeah, we can't do all those slabs.
We don't
That-
have a plan for.
We do,
Yeah, we do.
each year.
Yeah.
We hope to knock them out each year.
Right,
So, you know, the priority was to do all residential streets.
Right.
When the
Right.
fund balance was 15%, and we were at like 34. So at that time, we were able to transfer money from, you know, general fund to do more of the streets in the city and kind of wrap all of that up within a 3 to 4 year time period. So now that we're in greater debt because of other projects, we're gonna have to spread
Push it
that
back.
over a longer
Mhm.
period.
I would like to see a priority given to that, though. I think as people go down to the new Hanley Sports Park, they're going to say these are terrible streets. We're already using the cutoff to Dearborn's or to get to the school district. And the comments I hear about the quality of the streets is not favorable. So I really think we need to push this as much as we can, even though it may be a
So what
huge
might happen in
expenditure.
2021 is instead of doing all those surface sealants, we kind of push that off, some of it off, not all of them, Sims Street.
She's kidding, good people of
She said it.
Okay,
She
like-
said it.
But in any event, that would be, they'll run that flagpole up
We
through
will.
Public Works.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The Public Works question more.
Yeah, 'cause the ice-
right?
yeah.
Oh, and
And so, yeah.
maybe we don't do
So-
something in some other department,
Exactly.
and we
We'll
put
keep
that
that-
in
We'll
there.
keep
But I
that
do
in
think
mind.
it needs to be looked at.
Yeah, and ice cream specialties now, the problem I've seen just in the last couple of months is Missouri American, there's been 3 breaks, you know, 2 over by Classic Car Studios, 1 over by Dobbs, and it's, you know, heaved the pavement such that they'll have to replace the slab. So maybe if it blows up enough, I'll have all those replaced.
We can pass the bill over
Yeah.
to the next guy.
That
Yeah.
sounds good. Have them do it.
Oh,
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
okay.
so do we have,
So Lisa is in court on Thursday.
okay,
So maybe if it's all right, she can go next.
that sounds good to me.
If there are people that we're not going to get to at all tonight.
It
do we have to
depends. I
keep
mean,
them?
we're here till 10, so we might be able to do.
Well, I think as a practical matter, you know, maybe if there's a natural stopping point, yeah, we'll get a feel for it. I don't see us going much past 8 o'clock. I think that would be mean.
I feel sorry for them.
So, you know, but let's see the progress that we're able to make.
And just before Lisa starts, because I asked the same question Alderman Parker Tice asked about the salary. Not asked, but I looked, and I went back and looked at the spreadsheet. Even though we said in 15 we had, or in 19 we had 15 positions. You didn't fill one of those positions, Dan, and we budgeted accordingly. We kept the position open, but that's why there's a difference in what we
Well, I was
budgeted.
comparing a budget number to a budget number, not the actual.
I know,
Oh, but you
and we
budgeted-
only budgeted for 14, is what I'm
Okay.
saying. That's
Okay.
why there's a difference between that and the benefits. So,
But your sheet shows the same number, 15 in 19 and
'Cause-
15 in. Okay,
correct, we didn't do away with one of those positions, and had we done away with it and said, we did not pay for that 15th person in 2019,
But you
18.
didn't budget him in 19?
No,
So you-
not 19, yes.
So the report should show 14
No.
in 19 and 15 in 20.
No, because these are budgeted positions.
Okay.
And if you take it off, next year you guys are gonna go, you guys added another position? No, we didn't add it. We had it in there, but due to budget constraints in the general fund, he had a position come open and it did not get filled.
Okay.
So that's the difference in what you're seeing in budgeted, and that we didn't fill it and we didn't budget for it. That's why there's a big difference. I just wanted to make that clear, that we're not having that big of an increase just because of 15 to 15.
Yeah.
It's really 14 to 15, no matter what that paper says.
Page 145.
Yes. Well, I'm on
So-
page
Always good to
141.
lead with a page number.
All right, so out of all of our account lines that we have, we've kept everything either at or we've decreased each individual account, except for full-time salaries, and I'll come back to that in just a couple of minutes. The only other item really account line that I want to talk about in our whole budget would just be miscellaneous contractual expenses. And that again has actually dropped from what was proposed in 2019 from 43,000 down to 37,000. Just so you all get a feel for what goes into miscellaneous contractual expenses. Really, it's, in my mind, for two purposes. One is to keep some funding in there for abatement of properties, which generally we've carried over about 15,000 every year. And then also what we use that account for would be to decide what are our priorities out of recommendations out of the comp plan, which is recent because we just adopted in 2018. And so if we need external outside help to complete some of those recommendations in the comp plan, that's generally also where that funding comes from. So for this year, again, we have 37,000. So what's being proposed is 15,000 again for property abatement and remediation. 6,000 for a contract we actually already have with Arcturus for the Hanley Industrial Court street plan and the branding plan. So we've already started that contract. In fact, we had our kickoff meeting this afternoon. And but that project will not wrap up completely by the end of December. So there's a little bit of carryover there. So I have about 6,000 for carryover for next year to finish out that contract. And the other comprehensive plan recommendation that I would like to see get started this year is coming up with some residential development standards. I still feel like that has been something our department receives comments on, and with the Architectural Review Board and their review of additions and new construction and so forth, there's still kind of a lot of confusion as to what I think Brentwood's expectations are for infill housing. And so we've actually started on this internally, but I think we're going to need a little bit of outside help to finish it. So I've got 16,000 budgeted for that. So the 15 for abatement, the 6 for Arcturus's contract, and 16,000 for some external help on the residential guidelines is how I came up with 37,000. The only other item I wanted to talk about in our budget would be full-time salaries. So I am asking or requesting that you all consider a new full-time position, code enforcement officer / housing inspector. If this would get funded, it is totally my opinion that we could eliminate the one part-time inspector position that we have. Karen helped me with some very rough numbers, so before I go into why I'm going to make my justification for it, Karen gave me some general numbers that if we hired a full-time code enforcement officer, housing inspector, with all the benefits and thinking of what the maximum salary is that we would pay that person. Round number is that we'd be at about $60,000. Again, that's at the top of the salary and full benefits, family plan. And if we eliminated the part-time inspector position, we'd eliminate about $35,000 of our expenses. So net increase is around $25,000. So to go into the justification for the full-time position, the code enforcement continues to be a top priority for our department and for all the services we provide for the community. So just to remind you, our department has to apply and enforce all the building, property maintenance codes, as well as our city zoning code, signage regulations, floodplain ordinances, and then we're also responsible for anything reported under Chapter 220 under the nuisance section of the code. So those are all the different codes and enforcement that we're responsible for the enforcement of. So to give you a little quick idea about how our department is structured, we have one building official, we have 2 full-time inspector positions, 1 part-time inspector position, and 1 permit tech. So again, what I'm proposing is we eliminate the part-time inspector, add the full-time code enforcement officer. When we hired our part-time inspector in July of this year, we didn't exclusively have him start working on code enforcement, but it was a good place for him to start. And I think I just have seen and witnessed what happens when you have a position that is really focused on code enforcement. And because of, again, his activities since July when we hired him, there's actually been 580 compliance letters that have been sent out. And out of those, really only 8 we think we're going to have to take to either municipal court or through our administrative hearing process. I, again, contribute a lot of that. I think there's a strong correlation when you have one person that's focused on it and gets that report kind of developed with that resident or business. It seems like we get much better voluntary compliance from individuals, and that's obviously what we're seeking. So also what we picked up for the last half of this year was to do more proactive code enforcement, so we did this by ward patrol. That is also why there's a lot more letters that were sent out, because we actually went down every street, cited everything that we found. And I think our department would like to try that procedure for other things community-wide. So for instance, if we decide that we're going to go ahead and maybe take a neighborhood and we need to do more right-of-way maintenance, or maybe with trying to move the discharge pipes back off of the right-of-way. Something, again, that we could work with maybe a whole block or several streets and do that code enforcement at one time, send out all those letters at one time. Again, I think that helps with just our enforcement activities and our compliance. I think the neighbors kind of like if they know that they're not being singled out, but we're looking at this whole street or this whole block, and those that needed to get the letter got the letter. So to kind of wrap up, the thing that I would also point out is that this code enforcement officer, housing inspector, would need less certifications through International Code Council than our inspectors would or building official. So I think also if we would have a code enforcement person, and that is more their assignments to focus on those areas, they would not need to have as many certifications as our building official and inspectors. The salary, the hourly is obviously a lot less than our inspectors. So to me, it's a better deal for the city if we're paying someone less hourly to really focus more on code enforcement and the housing inspections. So that person, again, would, in the housing inspection area, would look for more life safety and code issues, property maintenance issues. So again, they don't need to have exactly the whole breadth of knowledge that our inspectors and a building official would need. So I think that's basically what I wanted to just bring out, and can answer any questions. So
Let's go back to your number of using the 580. That was from just your part-time inspector, or is that from all 3 of your inspectors doing a weekly activity?
So there was some involvement with the inspectors and the building official, but largely it was just putting the part-time person on that assignment.
Now, do your other 2 inspectors then get into doing neighborhood roving and inspections and stuff that,
They do. What they would be asked to do and continue to do was, again, if you're going down the street for an inspection, don't ignore something, don't ignore a code violation, but come back with that, make a note of it, put it in request tracker. But then if it's in request tracker, then that assignment could go to the code enforcement person. It wouldn't necessarily be their responsibility to follow up on what they saw.
you have 570 of these that you've resolved without having to get to the court side. That's marvelous. My question, I guess, is, are those individual homes, or am I looking at repeat offenders that, yeah, hey, if I can work and the city works with me, I can keep working all these things through, type thing? What do you find it to be? More individual homeowners and individual persons, or no, I've got repeat offenders that just don't take care of properties in the area?
So in this case, since it was more of a proactive, it was more individuals, but especially in the summertime with just things like weeds and overgrowth, we definitely have our habitual every year. So those obviously might be 5 letters get sent to them in a summer season, so.
We have new management in Brentwood first, and this problem of the city not finding people move in, but they don't get an occupancy permit, also works for us because we have people living there that we don't know are living there. So could this person full-time work on the occupancy permit with the management?
That primarily has fallen to our permit technician. That position was created just 2 years ago. 2 years ago. I really feel like if we would also do this code enforcement officer, then the department is kind of set in terms of this hierarchy. We can have people kind of focus and have obviously qualifications and credentials they need, but hopefully also, because we are having problems kind of filling some positions. It's kind of in this industry, a lot of communities are feeling that. But I also think it might be a good way to bring people in kind of at a level, and then, hopefully they would be inspired to move up, and we would keep them more as a long-term employee. That would be another, hopefully, strategy, I would think, of trying to keep people here, and, you give them an opportunity that, someday they might be able to step up and take on more responsibilities.
All right, thank you, Lisa.
All right. Yes.
Why don't we do one more? Do you think fire?
Yeah, who wants to go next?
Yeah, who wants to go over the barrel next?
It's 10 till 8, I'll just tell you that.
Page 84.
Okay. Predominantly, capital is where our biggest needs are in this, for the fire department budget. I'm looking at page 197 as a starting point. There's an illustration of the building with a $40,000 price tag at the top. That $40,000 is a 2019 expense. That was for design and engineering of the 88 project that has been bid out, and we're just waiting on a recommendation on contractor. So the 2020 budget starts pretty much at the next page on the $160,000 cost. That's an estimated construction cost that was a compilation of $100,000 that was approved, well, not approved, but suggested be in the 2020 budget last year to complete construction of the ADA work in the firehouse. Now, just so everybody understands, this is not the elevator, this is not the parking lot, this is bathrooms and kitchens within the fire station, okay? We had to break this down a little bit because of the costs of all of those other outdoor issues. So what I did is I talked to Karen, and because we weren't going to be able to spend all $100,000 for 2019, just the $40,000 for design and engineering,
it was suggested I move the $60,000 balance into 2020, making that a total of $160,000. I can tell you that we opened bids the other day. 2 bids were received on the project. One was $6,000 more than this $160,000 number, and the other one was $20-something thousand higher. But I don't have the recommendation from the engineers yet to see who was the best bid. So we went over a little bit with the construction costs and what were estimated in this. So we'll have to work through that. I'm going to move on from the ADA project. So the idea is beginning in 2020, if this budget is approved as proposed, we'll start construction with one of these 2 firms that have bid on this project. But those bids will move forward to the Board of Aldermen on December 2nd. So you all will hear the presentation of bids for that on the 2nd. All right, on the next page, on 199, I address fire station alerting upgrades. So the St. Louis County Emergency Communications Commission floated a tax referendum to the voters in St. Louis County, I believe in 2011 or 2012, that created that organization and created a funding mechanism for communications within public safety in St. Louis County. This has been an item that's been on our budget and off our budget for several years for these fire station alerting upgrades. Essentially what happened was the the ballot language of St. Louis County indicating that fire station alerting upgrades would be part of it, so now it is required that they produce new digital alerting for us. They will literally bring a wire and a box to the outside of our building. I have to be prepared to bring that digital signal into the building and interface it with all of our old analog system. So there'll be some costs associated with that, and so that's what that $10,000 estimate is for. That's something that I don't have a lot of control over because we'll have to make these changes at some point or we won't be able to receive our calls. All right, moving to the next page, fire department command vehicles. So tell you a little story on these. These have been in the budget on again, off again since about 2016-17. Chief Cottrell and I both are assigned one of these vehicles. They're essentially a mobile command post that we bring back and forth to work. They have all of our personal protective equipment in them. The pictures illustrate our command box in the back, which is an accountability system. It's how we manage our incidents and make sure that our folks are safe. Essentially, in 2017, we had purchased, well, not purchased, but we had signed an order for a vehicle when the mold was discovered in the fire station. It was at that point in time that one of these vehicles and a boat were cut from our budget, as well as several other things to try to fund the higher need of that mold remediation. Okay, this is a long-winded story. It's not a fun one to tell, but it's the reality. So anyway, Bola and I worked together to come up with as much money as we could through budget savings, and then of course the rest of it came from approval from the board when we got the program to take care of that. So anyway, we are now down to the point where we have 2 vehicles where I have recommendations from the mechanics to replace them, take them out of frontline service. So my goal as a department head would never be to replace these at the same time. We would buy one and stagger the other, so we're never buying 2 at the same time. We're kind of in a boat now where we have 2 vehicles that are pretty well shot, worn out, for frontline emergency service. Doesn't mean they couldn't go to somebody down the road and they drive them for another 10 years, but what we're talking about is emergency response with lights and sirens, et cetera. So they need to be in top shape. So that's where we find ourselves needing 2 of those. I worked with Larry Covey on the IT budget to defer approximately $60,000 plus or minus dollars from a fire station security enhancement upgrade that was scheduled for 2020 to try to fit in the second vehicle this year. So that's been pushed off a year. So that's sort of the story on the command vehicles. The boat, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on. We talked about it a little bit last night. The boat is on its way, and the motor and trailer essentially are what's remaining of that project. The reserve ambulance, we have recommendation from the emergency service folks that take care of all of our fire apparatus, the emergency vehicle technicians, that it is beyond its useful life. It was built specifically for the old fire station. It is shorter than what we would prefer. Height in the box where we do patient care, it's smaller than what we would typically replace it with, like the 2012 we have now, but it was designed and built to fit in a smaller building. The other issue is that General Motors no longer supports this cabin chassis, so getting parts is becoming very, very hard. The bodybuilder, MedTech, is no longer in business, and getting parts from them is becoming harder and harder. And the air ride suspension, same situation. So it was recommended to me by our service folks that this be out the door as soon as we can possibly do it. It has been deferred 1 year. BOLA asked me to defer it last year into the 2020 budget, which we gladly did. And we find ourselves now with our frontline ambulance having more miles on it and more hours on it than what we would like to move it into reserve status. So while we'd be replacing the reserve ambulance, we'll move the current frontline ambulance into reserve status and then put a new frontline ambulance in service. It should be noted that it takes about a year. Chief Cottrell and his committee have put together specifications for this. They spent the better part of at least 6 months on it. There's still about 3 months to go in terms of once we have funding in place, we will design, have blueprints done, we'll go to bid or look at the joint purchasing agreements that are out there and find the best deal for us. And then it takes between 7 months and a year to take delivery of it. So we're not even looking at this ambulance for another year essentially. So if we order it in, say, March of next year, maybe by the end of the year at the earliest, and rolling into 21 after that. So we've got to try to work it out. We are proposing a lease purchase on this vehicle as opposed to an outright cash buy. It gives Karen some latitude on budget planning. The interest rates are still very favorable, and finance and BOLA supported that concept. So with that said, I'm kind of at the end of my capital items. Does anybody have any questions on those before we change gears?
Chief, is there any grants that could be written in order to try to help subcosting some of the ambulance?
I'm not aware of any at this time. It's not a typical grant type item.
What about the equipment that would be going inside the vehicle?
I'm not aware of any. Are you aware of any? I'm not. Yeah, we can look again, but we haven't found anything. And that you raise a valid point. That ambulance cost is for some equipment, for a new monitor, defibrillator, and a stretcher and a loading. So, but I'm not aware of any. There's none that I hear from my peers out there, but we can certainly, we always look for grant opportunities. So
there's a commitment to look for grant opportunities for other items that are in this budget, not the ambulance. I started contacting some of our financial institutions because we are very fortunate to have the West Community Credit Union. They have been very, very generous to the city. So I've started contacting, for instance, UNB, their trustee, to see whether they have grants for municipalities. So we're going to continue to do that to see if we can find other ways to offset the cost for some of the equipment that we're going to purchase.
Last question, if
Sure.
I may. We ran into a problem a couple of years ago that we hadn't done a very good job of making sure turnout gear and equipment that you all needed to have the personnel where they work. That's all on a rotation schedule
Yes,
now,
sir.
so that we're not going to get caught with having stuff that's breaking down and
that's
worn
right,
out.
and we've got that in our 5-year capital plan. That's coming up in a couple of years. We'll be bringing the next generation of turnout gear to you all for probably in 2022. We're working with Metro West Fire District, who we've successfully been in a joint purchasing contract with for the last several sets that we bought, or last 2 versions of sets we bought. That has been tremendously a cost savings for us. purchasing well over 130 sets of gear as opposed to 23.
Do
So-
we do our own inspections of the air tanks, since we have our own compressor to fill?
Right. So what we do is we do the daily inspections. Each member of each crew is expected to do a daily check on their SCBA. That is the number one safety piece of equipment that we operate with, along with our turnout gear. We have daily checks, we have monthly checks, and then we do our annual checks, which are about to begin very shortly. We do pump testing, ladder testing. I take that back. This year, the function tests and fit tests that we do for that equipment has already been done. So they are annually function tested by an authorized factory vendor to make sure that they are working correctly, and whatever maintenance needs to be done is done annually in the fall.
Thank you.
I don't think there are any other questions on your capital expenditures.
Okay.
So if you've got-
Okay, so I just wanted to point out something that I didn't catch until tonight, and so if you will turn to page, let me find it here, 91. So, under our proposed 2020 budget, predominantly the salaries and benefits costs are inserted by Karen. I want to just make sure everybody understands what the clothing allowance line is at the top under account number 6390. The city authorized the firefighters to receive 2 payments twice a year, 1 payment twice a year, for clothing maintenance. That is not their personal protective clothing that we supply them. That is their uniforms. We issue those uniforms when they're hired. They're expected to maintain them with that stipend that they're given twice a year. And so I don't want that number to get confused with down below item 6400 under uniform purchase. It, just by definition of the titles, is a little confusing, and it's come up in the past. That is all of our personal protective equipment. Anybody that's hired that we outfit, if we have any of that PPE that's damaged on a call, for example, when we had the ammonia leak here, we had to take all that out of service. It had to go for cleaning and inspection. Had it been irreplaceable or irreparable, we would have had to buy it out of that account to replace it. So that number seems high, but it's an insurance policy. My best hope is that we don't touch that, because if we are, that means something has gone wrong and a crew's been put in harm's way worse than what we would want them to be. So from that standpoint, that is a number that I don't like to use unless we're hiring people, and then that's where we draw that down. So the mistake that I caught, at least I think is a typo, is under 6210 miscellaneous contractual. I submitted $80,800, and it's reflecting $90,800. Yep, so that is simply a, no?
That's the $10,000 Prop P for emergency manager.
Okay, well, that's on the table, so I did not know that.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that's where that was. I thought it was in a Prop P fund. So
It is Prop P, but it's in the general fund. It won't get transferred over to capital.
Okay, all right. I apologize, I didn't catch that earlier, and we could have talked about it. I'm sorry, Alderman, what?
The 90, 80, 800 is a good.
As of tonight, right here, right now, yes, but with the instruction that we've been given on the other research on Prop P, it may change.
Gotcha.
So,
Go ahead.
may I ask what's in there? Like, what's the extra 10,000 that
Oh.
you said, I just didn't.
It's for the emergency
If you,
management.
what page was that little chart on,
Remember,
Karen?
it's
Prop P?
the 10,000, that's the fire department's portion of the emergency
emergency
manager.
manager.
That is Prop P, but it stays in the general fund.
Well, I just wondered what it was for. Not weird.
Hold on.
Yeah,
It would be my portion of the emergency manager's
Oh, it was in the
additional
front. Yeah.
job
Yeah.
duties.
Way back here, yeah,
Yes.
I know exactly, yeah.
right.
Thank you.
Okay, my apologies, I
That's
didn't
okay.
realize that.
Did you see the little purple thing underneath it?
I did,
Do you
so
want me to
that
do
was the
that?
next thing I was going to
Okay.
explain. So under training, 6240, We were given the latitude this year to look outside of applicants for new positions, not new positions, to fill existing positions that did not possess certification of the St. Louis County Fire Academy. Our applicant pool has been getting weaker over the years, and we've just tried to figure out ways to increase the applicant pool and get the best talent. So I went to Bola and asked her if we could have the latitude to not require the St. Louis County Fire Academy, and she gave me that latitude, with the caveat that myself and Jason from HR and Chief Cottrell worked out it would be essentially a loan to the candidate. So the city would cover their tuition cost of approximately $4,000, and then they would be set up on a payback to get that $4,000 back. I believe we agreed a 2-year term, and so that 78.3. That little purple mark on there is just a note that indicates that they'll be paying that $4,000 back over 2 years.
That's Karen's note.
That's Karen's purple mark.
Chief, you were involved in the Joint Fire Command program that they were looking at to do with the multiple communities. Has that all just fallen apart and just
It's essentially dead in the water right now.
So there's no additional costing that we should be
No.
putting into to look at that?
The only thing that we're involved in now with joint municipalities is Brentwood, Clayton, and Maplewood with our shared training.
Training range officer,
Yeah.
okay.
The joint command is off the table.
Now, what about our medical officer?
So our medical officer currently is a lieutenant in the fire department. Now,
The gentleman at the hospital.
medical control.
Yeah, is he a joint expenditure also?
So, well, joint in the sense that anybody that operates under SSM medical direction operates jointly through their control, their standard operating guidelines, their medical direction on calls. From that standpoint, yes. We do not pay for those services.
Okay.
That's something that there was a contractual issue this year. That should have already come before you, but
Yes.
SSM had some changes internally that we were waiting to see the fallout from, and it's been favorable. Now I'm waiting for them to reissue those contracts, and we'll be bringing that forward sometime, I anticipate, early in 2020.
And there is no cost connected to us?
Correct. That is a no-fee contract. Yep.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Other questions?
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. All right, so that leaves us with police, Parks and Rec, anything. Admin, yeah, I think of the ones that will take more time. I think we can probably, which of course will probably take an hour and a half, but I think we're at a good stopping point, unless
Is judicial, they're not coming.
you feel strongly otherwise, given it's been 2 hours. I mean, what do you? Okay. I should have led with this. Thank you all for the hard work. The budget presented is balanced, and I know that's no easy thing to do. Thank you for being responsive and helpful and candid with and responding to our questions. Thank you for sitting through this meeting. You didn't get to. And I guess we'll take it up on Thursday at noon.
No,
So
I cannot make your new meeting. I'm not able to.
And if there are questions, and I've opened this up to, YouTube land and other aldermen as well, that if there are questions that you want covered, please let us know, and we will do our best to get those answered. I certainly don't, I would like to have this vetted as well as possible so that there aren't new things that come up when it is presented to the big board at the December meeting, the first December meeting, whenever that is. I guess at this time,
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
all right, all those in favor say aye. All right, we're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.